So could you just tell me your name, rank and what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Paul Vines. I'm a detective sergeant on the Trafficking and Exploitation team. Modern slavery is where an individual is exploited essentially for the personal or commercial gain of another. It includes human trafficking, forced labour, domestic servitude. There's all different formats it presents itself in, but ultimately it's somebody exploiting another for their own financial gain. Many of the cannabis farms that we come across, they are generally run by organised criminal groups who very often exploit vulnerable people. Very often the people involved are victims of modern slavery or human trafficking, and they're the ones who are used to cultivate the crops. These victims are forced into illegal labour, very often having been promised legitimate work within the UK and a better life. Very often the groups will use debt bondage or threats of violence, sometimes even physical violence, in order to entrap the workers, making them feel that they're not able to leave the position they find themselves in. For the police, modern slavery is very difficult to tackle. A lot of the reason is the victims themselves don't realise that they're being exploited. They don't recognise it. And that's why it's so important that we reach out to the public for help. The victims that we find within cannabis growers, for example, they would have been promised a better life within the UK. They're brought over on false pretences, and generally these people would be targeted. They may have vulnerabilities, be it problems with their mental health or drug or alcohol problems, and encouraged to come to the UK, promised good jobs and earning obviously much better wages than they would back in their home countries. Many would not be able to speak English, obviously not have any contacts or awareness of the geographical location that they're forced to work in. The tactics that they use, be it debt bondage, where they accrue debts for it could be for money, travel, and ultimately the interest on those debts is unmanageable, and they're owed vast amounts of money to their exploiters who capitalise on that. Very often we see threats of violence towards them or family members back at home, because the exploiters will have links to those family members. It's important, I think, that people know that the victims aren't benefiting any way from the crimes that they're being forced to commit. They're coerced into living in these horrible conditions, often trapped in properties for what could be weeks or months on end. Not necessarily physically trapped. That can occur. However, through threats of violence and ill treatment, they're often feel that they can't leave, and their lack of English and awareness again of the local areas makes it extremely difficult for them to reach out for help. They're provided very little in terms of food. Very often when we carry out warrants at cannabis grows, there's evidence that the victims have been sleeping on the floor in very, very poor conditions. I think they're much more common than people think they are. There'll be grows in Warwickshire now that we're unaware of, and I think it's very important for people to have that awareness that you potentially have a cannabis grow in a house on your street, and that's why it's so important that the community sort of look out for it and report any signs that they're concerned about in order for the police to respond effectively. The signs, particularly for a cannabis grow, would be the strong, distinctive smell of cannabis. It's a sickly smell, quite a powerful smell that you would tend to notice if you were in close proximity to a cannabis farm. Frequent visitors going in and out of the property day and night. Very often the windows will be blackened out, sometimes with blinds. It could be newspaper, it could be foil. Because of the equipment that's used, there might be a high level of condensation on the windows. You could hear a whirring sound of the fans that they use to dissipate the smell. It may be simple things like large amounts of rubbish each week outside the property. And also it could be the physical aspects of the building in terms of ducting, wires, fans protruding out of the roof or the walls. And then in terms of the signs of a potential victim of modern slavery, so it could be simple things, that the person doesn't speak English. There's signs of physical abuse, bruising, unaccounted injuries, malnutrition, lack of basic hygiene due to the lack of facilities that they might have, restriction on movement, if they're not allowed to leave a property. You might notice food parcels being dropped off at home. And another common one when it comes to sort of organised groups is a high amount of CCTV monitoring a property. So, again, in isolation, each of those might not necessarily be a concern, but when there's 2 or 3 or more indicators, the police would definitely like to hear about it. I'd ask anybody who sees anything that they don't feel that's right to report it. It might be that you've seen someone who appears afraid, vulnerable, or physically being moved against their will. These are all signs of exploitation that we all need to be aware of in order to tackle modern slavery.